and welcome to another video. This time we will be doing a CPU comparison of sorts between the Ryzen 5 2600 CPU and the Ryzen 5 3600. So the two generations of Ryzen CPU compared. And of course we will be specifically looking at racing sims. I realize these CPUs are not exactly new at this point, so while I would certainly rather test some brand new CPUs, this is sadly all I can offer at the moment, but I think such comparison is still of some interest for several reasons. First of all, I think plenty of people are still on the Zen Plus platform at the moment and might be considering an upgrade. So they might be interested in how such an upgrade would benefit them in the first place. Secondly, as we are basically just upgrading to a newer generation processor with higher single-core performance, and everything else stays exactly the same, including the number of cores and threads. And since racing sims still tend to be very single-core limited in performance, that difference alone is still very much important. And thirdly, there's also the fact that there are sadly pretty much no performance comparisons for racing sims on the internet. I think it's a shame, because sims are somewhat specific in their requirements, and doing sim racing specific benchmarks and comparison I think would be quite interesting. So this is me trying to at least fill in that gap as well as I am able to. So here's the specs of the PC the tests were performed on. Note that the Ryzen 2600 was overclocked to an all-core overclock of 3950 MHz. So it was not running at stock settings, but I figure most people would overclock such CPU anyway, at least to some extent. And also the performance difference compared to stock is not that big in a single-thread oriented load, such as games, for example. The 3600 was running at stock settings, but it's almost not worth the hassle to overclock it anyway, because except for improving temperatures and maybe the multi-threaded performance a little, which is of little consequence to games, contrary to what many benchmarkers would tell you, but that's another topic. The motherboard had a BIOS upgrade done when switching from the 2600 to the 3600. I would have personally liked to keep the BIOS the same, but it had to be done for CPU support, and the Zen 2 BIOSes for this board apparently don't support the Zen Plus CPUs, or not well at least, so I didn't want to risk it and didn't feel like testing that claim. As for the benchmarks themselves, I tried to stay as close to the settings I normally use in those sims. I just wanted to limit the GPU bottleneck, so the CPU difference was not limited by the GPU, which in most cases meant lowering the anti-aliasing and maybe some detail settings. I also ran most of the additional software I normally use when sim racing in the background, like, I don't know, Crew Chief or SimHub. One last thing I want to point out is that I didn't want to use replays for the comparison, because again I wanted the test to convey the actual racing performance as much as possible, and replays often run better than what you get when you are actually driving the sim yourself. So the test runs don't match exactly. I try to keep them as close as possible, but obviously there are still differences due to AI behavior and many other things. For this reason, I've also included the minimum, average and maximum frame rates for the entire test run, and also the 0.1% frame rate, which you can see all at the top below the actual frame rate. So let's get to the actual benchmarks. So first off is Automobilista. This sim is using some pretty old technology. It runs on DirectX 9 and has very low hardware requirements for current day PCs. It is also heavily single-threaded. It generally uses about 1.5 threads to run, not much else. It is also not GPU heavy, so your frame rate is very much limited by the CPU on a decent enough machine. I didn't even have to lower my normal settings for the test here. Next up is Raceroom racing experience. This one is similar to AMS in that it is using a fairly old technology, and it is also using DirectX 9. It is, however, not as easy on performance as AMS is, because it is stretching everything to the absolute limit of DirectX 9 at this point. It is still very heavily single-threaded, though, and generally uses around 2 threads. For the test, I am using one of the lowest performing combos I have found, which is GT3 cars at Spa, where with enough visible cars the frame rate really plummets as you go down the hill towards Eau Rouge and Radelion and that section. So note that this is really one of the worst examples in Raceroom. It will mostly run better than what you see here. I had some issues with AI on my tests. I rarely race AI, so I don't have it trained properly. So the runs don't match very well. More so because I always try to have the whole AI field in front of me, so the performance hit was as significant as possible. So apologies about that. sim for the test is rFactor 2. That one is tough. It is all over the place in performance, in my experience. It can run really well with some combos and then not great with others. And it can also have big differences in performance in various spots of the same track. RF2 is not running DirectX 9 anymore at this point. It uses DirectX 11. But despite that, it is still very single-threaded in its nature. And mostly just uses one or maybe 2 threads maximum to run. Again, I've chosen a combo that was fairly CPU heavy in certain parts at least, especially on the start-finish straight. That was a bottleneck point. Now we get to one of the newest sims on the market, and that is of course the Assetto Corsa Competizione. It is a fairly hardware demanding sim and it does use several threads to run. However, despite that, it is still very single thread heavy, and your performance will not be great if your CPU is not able to keep up. This is especially true if you're running a lot of AI cars. So for ACC you need good single-threaded performance, because the frame rate you get mostly depends on a single thread with another one close behind. And you also need some 5 or 6 threads on your CPU for the remaining lighter threads and for your background stuff. The 2600 certainly has the necessary number of threads available, but it kinda lacks the single-threaded performance and will therefore be lacking when doing AI races with, say, more than 15 or so cars. That's probably the limit to keep above 60 FPS. now we're to the latest sim on the market that is technically still in development and not released yet. And that is of course Automobilista 2. I had some serious trouble getting AMS2 to be as much CPU bound as possible, because just like Project Cars 2, it is very well optimized for modern hardware, can distribute the load well between several threads, probably the most of all the tested sims, and as such it is usually GPU limited when you run it. I had to lower the settings a fair amount to try and remove the GPU limitation.
Five, four, three, two, one, go. Five left, 50, turn 6 right of a crest, 6 left.
The next one up is Dirt Rally 2.
80, keep middle of a jump.
This one was a tough nut to crack, as its settings are a bit of a mystery to me. It is a game that needs both a fairly powerful GPU as well as CPU, and changing settings doesn't seem to have that much of an effect on performance. I had to go really low with the settings to remove its dependency on the GPU, the most of all of the tested games. so the test settings are really far from what I normally use.
30.
Also, I seem to have done a lot better in the second run, so the two runs don't sync exactly well.
4 right long, tightens of a crest, 50. Don't cut 4 left, into 6 right, into 6 left long, 30. 6 right of a crest, opens extra long, into slow, 6 left long of a bump, into 3 right of a crest, bump, into 4 left long, into turn 1 right, opens long, tarmac. Don't cut through bales, keep right of a 30, turn 1 right, opens of a crest, gravel, 50, 5 left, into flat right of a crest, opens long, tightens of a jump, into 5 left of a crest, tightens very long, into 6 right, 50, 4 right, extra long, opens flat of a crest, into 6 left, into 6 right, into caution, 5 left of a jump, 50. 6 left, very long, tightens of a bump, 50. 4 right long. Into slow, 6 left of a crest, 30, turn 1 left, don't cut. 30. 6 left, 100. 3 right long, tightens, locks outside. Opens of a crest, 50. Tight, 6 left of a crest, extra long of a junction, 30. Keep middle of a jump, into 3 left long, tightens, 80. Flat right of a crest, extra long, 30. 3 right long, opens, 80. 5 left of a crest, extra long, caution, tightens 3, into 4 right long, into 4 left, into 4 right, don't cut, 120, crest, into 5 left, tightens, into 4 right long, of a junction, middle, 6 left, extra long, 170, caution, 5 right long, tightens 4, slow 50, turn unseen, 1 right, opens, extra long of a crest, 160 of a bumps, 4 left, extra long, tightens turn, 5 left, opens, 80. 4 left at bale, don't cut, 30, turn unseen, 2 left around bale, cobbles, don't cut 3 right, 3 left and 1 right, tightens around bale, cobbles, 30, 1 right, don't cut 2 left, 40, turn 2 left around bale, tarmac, 160, over finish, 50 to stop.
And to close the CPU comparison off, here's some Assetto Corsa. Now, I didn't originally plan on including AC in this comparison, but then I decided it might still be of some use to someone. So while I didn't do any actual driving in AC, I at least ran the internal benchmark, which still gives you an idea on the game's performance. Please note though that my AC configuration is not stock. I'm using the custom shaders patch and some other tweaks which honestly improve the performance of the game noticeably. So while you can still compare the two CPUs here, bear in mind that this is not really representative of the AC performance you would get with the game at stock settings and unmodified, but I still think it's useful. And that's pretty much it. As far as I'm concerned, I think the upgrade like this is worth it if what you're after is getting more than 60 FPS, or at least 60 FPS if we're talking about Assetto Corsa Competizione. It should also be a noticeable improvement for VR users, I think, where the improved single-threaded performance should come in handy and help you with your frame rate, provided you have a good GPU, good enough. And really, it's important to know that the performance ultimately depends on your GPU as well. And the performance of your GPU also obviously depends on the resolution you are using and on your detail settings. So you really have to balance all of this well and match the CPU to GPU and your settings. It's a process that you have to balance correctly to get as much gain as possible. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching. I'm thinking about doing another video soon that would focus more on how to measure and evaluate how well the games are multi-threaded, and generally on explaining some of the stuff about modern multi-core or multi-threaded CPUs, because it seems that almost nobody understands well how it should be evaluated and tested, not even big hardware channels and benchmarkers. And it honestly drives me nuts when I see that. But I can't really promise when or even if that video will eventually happen. Meanwhile, if you are interested, you can watch my races currently mostly on Twitch. I stream without commentary, and you can watch my streams at Twitch TV/Moving Chicane, or you can follow me on Twitter or join my Discord. As always, the information is in the video description. Again, thank you for watching. See you next time.